Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's UNESCO Chair webinar. My name is Darla Deerdorf. I'm the UNESCO Chairholder on Intercultural Competence based at Stellenbosch University, and we are so glad you're here. We also invite you to please type into chat where you're coming from today to introduce yourselves there. We'd love to get to know you. And welcome as those of you are still coming in. This is our monthly webinar series on exploring intercultural competence from African perspectives. And today's webinar is the last webinar in our series for 2025. And we will resume the series with exciting speakers starting in February of 2026. And so we will be sending out further details after the first of the year. And I hope all of you can join us then, starting in February again. So again, thanks so much for introducing yourselves in chat and welcome to today's webinar. Just a note that this is being recorded and you will be able to access this recording on our UNESCO Chair website. And also, there will be time for questions for our speaker. And so we invite you to type those questions into chat as you are listening to today's speaker. We are also going to be having a follow-up session next week with our speaker on Wednesday, and all of you are invited to join us for that. And you'll hear more details in chat a bit later about that. So I just wanted to recognize our UNESCO Chair core team. And as you can see, we also have two co-chairs. Both of them are here with us today, Dr. Divinia Jitu and Dr. Precious Simba. And then we also have other members of our core team, some of whom are also here with us today. And we are very grateful to this team for making the work of this UNESCO Chair possible. So with that, let me give you a few other announcements. Many of you may be aware of the UNESCO Story Circles. This is one of our key capacity building tools on intercultural competence that our chair is engaged with. And we are involved in taking UNESCO Story Circles out across South Africa and the continent. And in fact, last month at our conference in Morocco, we had a special Train the Trainers. And there will be another Train the Trainer actually next week in Italy and one online on November 23rd. So there are a number of different ways that you can learn about UNESCO Story Circles, including through the open access manual that you see here. And there's also a very short introduction video from UNESCO. The manual, I should note, is available in 7 different languages. So we invite you to have a look and to let us know what questions you might have, as you hopefully can also take UNESCO Story Circles out as a way to build key intercultural competencies, such as listening for understanding instead of for response or reaction. We also want to invite you to join us with our partner. One of our partners is a global nonprofit called the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competence. If you are not already a member, we would love for you to become a member. It's free to join. You just complete a brief online form at this website, iccglobal.org, and then you'll get access to the World Council online platform and community. There are over 5,000 colleagues in the World Council community around the world, and many of them are engaged in working groups, which are the heart of the World Council, including a special ICC in Africa working group that we invite all of you to join. And that's the group that will be meeting next week with today's speaker for further discussion and follow-up. Also, so you'll see the upcoming events. I mentioned the one next week on Wednesday, and we hope all of you can join us then at this same time. And then we will resume our webinar series in February 2026. We also want to invite you to our 2026 annual Intercultural Conference of our UNESCO Chair, which will be the end of September in Senegal. So we hope all of you can join us then, and we will be sending out further details about that conference. So today's speaker will be introduced by one of our co-chairs, Divinia Jitu. And I just wanted to mention before turning this over to her that we were so honored to have Dr. Mohammed Elmeski as the keynote speaker for last month's annual conference in Rabat, Morocco. So our 2025 annual UNESCO Chair Intercultural Conference was held in person in Rabat, Morocco, a month ago. And we were so delighted to have Dr. Elmeski give the keynote at that conference, which was truly just an amazingly generative conference full of for really impactful and dynamic discussions with colleagues from all across the continent and the world. But I would say that Dr. Elmeski really set the stage quite nicely for those kinds of in-depth discussions to take place. And we are delighted to be able to bring him to you today so that for those who weren't able to be in Rabat, at least you'll be able to hear from our keynote speaker there for last month. So we're grateful that he's here with us, and to introduce him more fully, I want to turn this over now to one of our co-chairs, Dr. Davinia Jitu, who is based at Durban University of Technology. So over to you, Davinia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Darla. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our speaker today. And already we're seeing him collaborate with, some of the participants from our UNESCO conference. So the conversations are carrying on. Dr. Mohammed Elmeski is a senior advisor, educator, and international development expert in comparative and international education. He currently serves as Charge de Mission Education at the Office of the Head of Government in Morocco, where he advises on national education policy across K-12, higher education, and vocational training. He also chairs the governance board of Africa Voices Dialogue, which is a pan-African platform dedicated to inclusive education policy dialogue. Dr. Elmeski brings over 25 years of experience advancing equitable, learner-centered education systems across the Global South. He has led and advised education reform initiatives in more than 15 countries, including Morocco, Ethiopia, Haiti, Nepal, and Zambia. His leadership includes high-level roles at the American Institutes for Research in Washington, D.C., and as Chief of Party for USAID's Higher Education Partnership in Morocco. He is a member of the Executive Committee of Karanga, the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills, and a fellow researcher in the International Study on Teacher Leadership, contributing to the 2024 UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report. His research and evaluation work has focused on social emotional learning, teacher leadership, school transformation in marginalized communities, and intercultural partnership models. He's a passionate advocate for intercultural dialogue in education and has delivered keynote speeches in Ireland, Norway, Korea, China, and across Africa, and like you've heard at our recent conference, and co-chaired the landmark ICSEI 2020 conference in Morocco under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed V, expanding Global South participation in global school reform networks. He earned his PhD in Comparative International Development Education and Program Evaluation from the University of Minnesota. He's fluent in Arabic, French, and English, and Dr. Elmeski embodies a deep commitment to bridging cultural divides and fostering inclusive education systems that promote belonging, dignity, and human flourishing. So we are very excited to listen to Dr. Elmeski today, and I hand over to Dr. Elmeski.
It's back now. Yes.
Perfect. Good. So just a little bit of a background. So as you know, I truly had the privilege to speak at the UNESCO Chair on Intercultural Competence Annual Conference in 2025 that was held in Rabat, specifically at the Université Internationale de Rabat. So what maybe brought me in the conversation, aside from the fact that intercultural competence is something that I'm really excited about is also the fact that for me, this intercultural competence goes hand in hand with social emotional learning. And as we all, as educators and decision makers, strive to really develop the autonomy amongst our learners and citizens, for me, these two are two faces of the same coin. The title of the conference or of the title of my keynote was Educating for Humanity, Social Emotional Learning and Intercultural Competence in Africa's Next Generation. And many of my colleagues here would attest to the fact that educating for humanity is not a cliche, is not a feel-good phrase. It's actually what we all realized it should be the purpose of education after we almost tried everything. And we're on the front lines of new changes, new developments, maybe new existential questions about the purpose of education and the relevance of education. And is the business as usual getting us to where we need to be or not? These are all important questions. But in all these questions, the common denominator is this humanity. What does it mean to educate for humanity? What does it mean to promote autonomy and empowerment at the individual level and at the collective level? This is where the social emotional learning, intercultural competence are clearly as important of competencies as all the other competencies that we talk about in education, mainly the communication, the cognitive, the knowledge piece, the 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 ethical, the values, etc. For me, this is the overarching model of looking at the purpose of education, but at the same time being very focused on the fact that for education to be sustainable and to be for humanity, it has to be meaningful. So this is why, or maybe this is the rationale for choosing a title like this for this keynote. You're all aware of some facts that nobody is disputing at this stage, especially from a demographic standpoint, is that 50% of Africa's population is under 25, which is a gigantic opportunity that by 2050, 1 in 3 young people aged 15 to 24 will live in Africa. That's also an important fact to keep in mind. And then every year, about 10 to 12 million young people in Africa transition into the labor market, 10 to 12. I do also want to bring in something else, which is also important. Between my keynote, I believe early October, and now, I made a few, just few tweaks to the keynote itself and added, maybe deleted some slides, added some other slides. And this is all thanks to the conversations I had with you in the conference and post the conference, because I'm assuming that nothing is static, we keep learning. And one of the questions that baffled us collectively is when we talk about intercultural competence at the level of Africa, all the African countries, what does it mean? What do we know? So looking at the landscape, it doesn't look like we're starting from scratch. And I believe there have been surveys of youth with not necessarily with that laser focused on intercultural competence, but they would call them maybe skills for the 21st century, skills for the future, etc. And for me, like for example, this 2024 survey, which follows that 2022 and the 2020 survey, gives us some data about youth's understanding, especially the African youth understanding of their present, but at the same time of their future. And having 3 points of data is always useful. So what came up as highlights from this survey? Number one, Afro-optimism is on the rise. So I believe when the data was collected in 2020, there were around 27% or 30% of youth who had hopeful outlook of the future. Now is about 37%. When we're talking about youth, we're talking always about 15 to 24. The second highlight from this survey is that there is a moral sense of solidarity and growing concern for social justice, be it as it applies to maybe gender equality, but at the same time, that huge or significant empathy about making sure that refugees are taken care of, seeing the human rights of refugees, for example, for stability, and at the same time for job opportunities, and just for living peacefully in the host land, which came up also in the survey. A majority support democracy, but half of the youth are not registered to vote, and I would assume this applies to most, if not all, the African countries. The African youth shows balanced global awareness. They welcome partnerships, yet they remain alert to hegemony, especially now hegemony coming from many countries, be it in the Far East, North, West, etc. So this also creates questions or raises questions among youth about what does it mean to be globally aware, what does it mean to be in a spirit of global partnerships, but at the same time, what does it mean to be assertive of your right to invest or use your own resources. The other thing that came up as well, or the other finding, is that 3/4 of the youth are very concerned about climate change, which is very important, and also says something about that sense of the shared land, be it the country, be it the African continent or the world at large. And finally, 4 in 5 youth see internet access as a human right. When we were in Rabat, we had the Generation Z movement, but as you know, this is not a generation. This is not just a generation movement that began in Rabat, but it began in Nepal and in many other countries as well. So and the internet and all kinds of social media platforms are bypassing the traditional means of communication, and at the same time maybe making horizontal what used to be as hierarchical or maybe cascading means of communication about what needs to happen, etc. So there is more democratization of access and expression of voice that comes with, of course, advantages and opportunities, but also it comes with its own share of threats. I just wanted to keep this, maybe add this as part of the backdrop of the conversation. And for all of you who are interested, the report is available, or the 3 reports are available. They will give you a sense of the youth perception of, especially the African youth perception of Pan-Africanism within Africa, which, while there was that expression of interest and solidarity between African countries, but just like we discussed in the Rabat keynote, there are going and there should be more opportunities to crystallize it a little bit more, articulate it a little bit more, and get into that sense, kind of move from that sense of we want to work together into being clear about what would it take for us to work together. So some of the stakes or some of the challenges, I would say, is that as I mentioned before, we got 10 to 12 million youth or go into the job market, but only 3 million formal jobs are created. So again, you are going to, many of the job applicants will have to deal with various cases of underemployment, if not exploitation. We also know that 26% of Africa's 226 million youth aged 15 to 24 are neither educated nor employed or trained. That's we're talking about a massive number that's not going, that requires really a confluence of energy and goodwill amongst African countries and partners to work on this, because again, this is not just an unpardonable wastage of human potential at the African continent, but globally, especially given the fact that we're talking about 50% of the world's youth would be from Africa. Then more than half of African migrants migrate across African countries, while around one-fourth has Europe as a destination region. I very much underscore the half of African migrants because migrating across African countries, and many of them settling in other African countries, because the common wisdom is that all of them are traveling or are migrating north. Now, these are the challenges, these are the problems, and we all know some of the tragic prices or cost of not dealing with them. This is why I think when you look at the International Organization of Migration, they have a very sobering report. It's called the Missing Migrants Project that really tracks the number of migrants that died as they try to better their lives, move from their country of origin to another country. And the numbers I'm going to give you, while they look big, but they are not as big as the real numbers, because again, when counting and really surveying this type of statistics is always fraught with difficulties. So I would say that even the numbers are on a low estimate of what the actual numbers could be. So when you look, for example, at the level of the African continent, there are 32,978 missing migrants they are missing in the Mediterranean. So when we say missing in the Mediterranean, here a significant chunk of them are coming from Africa, but I would say also given what's going on in the Middle East, specifically, I would say another significant chunk is coming from that part of the world. In Africa specifically, it's 17,603 missing migrants. So, and again, when you look at the African map, it's all over the place, but you see that largest concentration is in the Sahel region and the Horn of Africa, and some significant numbers also on the Indian Ocean. Now, comparatively, the Mediterranean and Africa has the largest share of the human tragedy. That's where, so out of the estimated number of 78,290 people who died trying to migrate from one place to another, between the Mediterranean and Africa, you've got the largest chunk. I believe it's more than 50%. And for those of you who are familiar with what's going on in the Americas, Asia, and the Western Asia, it's also significant numbers, but still tragic, but not as they don't just stand out tragically as the level of the African continent in the Mediterranean. So why am I mentioning these numbers? Because again, I'm just trying to underscore the fact that talking about intercultural competence, or talking about social emotional learning, and talking about strengthening this human capital or human potential, this is not some kind of an intellectual need, I would say. This is not just something a feel-good type of approach, but this is really an existential need where if we want to promote this resilience, this ability to sort out solutions, this ability to work together, it has to be done at the individual level, but at the collective level, at the government level as well. This is why the way forward, the African agenda, the Africa's 2063 agenda, is a critical document to bring into this conversation. So from the African Union standpoint, definition of the Africa we want, so they want, or we want, as said by the African Union, a strategic framework. It wants to deliver on specific strategic goals. So let's look at these goals. So some of the most important areas is an African continental free trade, which, as you know, it's the core of stability, making sure that the economy of the various African countries is complementary. They can work with each other, and at the same time ensuring food security, which is an important factor or that accounts for migration being documented or undocumented. In addition, of course, to the major threat that we all know, which is the lack of stability and security. So the African trade or continental free trade is one of the flagships projects of the Agenda 2063. It aims at eliminating trade barriers and boosting intra-African trade. Remember, please, this eliminating trade barriers, because it's very much related to our focus on intercultural competence. Now, Africa is and will be investing massively in infrastructure, roads, bridges, ports, and fiber optic cables. Like, look at any reports, the investment is massive, and the involvement of foreign direct investment in supporting this is really massive as well, just because of the expected growth in the area. But our thesis and what we together want to advance, because we truly believe that the heart of creating integrated economies is not just physical infrastructure, but also the human infrastructure. So as you know, many African nations in here, since the focus is on Africa, I'll just talk about the African continent. Trade is a desired outcome, is a desired state of affairs we want between countries, but we know that trucks who cross the border, many of the drivers lose their lives to all kinds of attacks. It could be gang motivated, but it could also be politically motivated because of all kinds of opinions about, for example, the other country or the other region not truly or maybe taking advantage of us. So trucks can cross borders, but if the border guards don't trust each other, if communities resist outsiders, or if traders cannot negotiate across cultural lines, movement slows down. So again, we can invest in all the infrastructure we want, put in all the money we want, but again, it goes to no avail, very limited end, if we don't take very, very seriously the human condition or the human factor for that. So Africa's future depends on trust as much as infrastructure. This is the most important takeaway from our conversation about educating for humanity. This trust and trust building, and what we need to do and to make sure we achieve maximization of trust, one person at a time, one community at a time. This brings me to this Igbo proverb from Nigeria that says that he who builds a house without people builds for the wind. And I think this always also brings me, even in education, to the critical importance of human sciences and social sciences and in the building of nations. It's not going to be built on the shoulders of technicians and engineers alone. Don't get me wrong, they are really very important. But as critical as that is also building the people. And building the people is really a function of, or maybe comes as a result of, investing in humanizing education and bringing the educators with this human outlook in mind into the conversation about building those intercultural competencies that make the focus or the purpose of education. So I chose this analogy of trust being the bridge between fear and freedom. And many of you also know that in the social exchange theory, it is critical to maximize the relationships. And a way to maximize the relationships is really maximizing the reward of the relationship, maximizing the trust of that comes as a result of the relationship, and at this end minimizing all kinds of cost. And cost is not just financial, but cost also comes from mistrust. So this is why that bridge for me is not just a physical bridge, but also it's an intercultural bridge that we have to be as intentional about building if we are truly focused on building a united, integrated Africa. So intercultural competence is that missing infrastructure. It is the bridge of dialogue and empathy that makes roads, trade, and treaties truly work. I'm highlighting dialogue and empathy because they are critical cornerstones in intercultural competence. So to educate for humanity, and here this is a bit of I would say an initial summary of our conversation, is that to educate for humanity, social emotional learning should be the compass, and intercultural competence is the bridge. Here, I'm not compartmentalizing the I would say the concepts, but I'm just visualizing how they could complement each other. So what does it mean, social emotional learning, and why do we call it the compass? So, as you know, as defined, the definition of CASEL according to the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So, CASEL defines social emotional learning as the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Always remember this because, again, as educators, these are critical components of anything we do in terms of building the competencies. So, acquiring, applying the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to do what? To develop healthy identities, to manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, make responsible and caring decisions. And as you notice here, all these knowledge and skills and attitudes, they build on each other to create what we call these academic, social, and emotional learning, or this social emotional competencies. So developing a healthy identity is really about knowing the self, but there is the self-awareness, but at the same time, there is the social awareness. Management of emotions, there is where we talk about the importance of regulation, and emotional regulation is critical because it's also related also to self-awareness, but also related to working with groups, achieving personal and collective goals. So this is where it talks about this sense of goal setting, which is a very important I would call it hallmark of agency, where you're not a victim, but you're an agent in what you're doing, and you've got some responsibility in pursuing that. And it's not about it's not about just me, but it's about us, this feeling and showing empathy for others. And again, this is also a very important, I would say, byproduct of living where we are right now, where the more I think means we have, and maybe the more technology we have, the more we know that we can't do it by ourselves, that we have to establish these supportive relationships. This way we counter this expanding feeling of loneliness and isolation of many of us, even if we are together. And then making this responsible and caring decisions, because again, it's not just, it's about the social responsibility, personal responsibility, environmental responsibility, etc. So this is the social emotional learning piece. This is the compass. Now, when I just talked about these, maybe just talked about this without the visualization, but it just speaks to these pieces: the self-awareness, the social awareness, the responsible decision-making, the relationship skills, and the self-management. How does it So let's look here at the intercultural competencies to bridge. So what is the focus of the intercultural competencies? So according to Professor Deardorff, it's the lifelong process of developing targeted knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And I very much wanted to build the lifelong process because it's an ongoing process, leading to behavior and communication that are both effective and appropriate in intercultural competencies. That's an important definition for me. It really jives well with the social emotional learning, and especially when we're talking about not just the self-awareness, but the social awareness as well. Now, always according to Professor Deardorff, the minimal requirements for intercultural competencies are the following: respect, valuing of others, self-awareness and identity. I remember this, you could also, it overlaps nicely with the social emotional learning, understanding the lens through which we each view the world, seeing from other perspectives, both how these perspectives are similar and different. So another minimal requirement: listening, engaging in authentic intercultural dialogue, and listening authentically, really listening, and adaptation, being able to shift temporarily into another's perspective. So this mental, intellectual agility is critical, minimal requirement. Relationship building, and again, this is also, as you see, it's also another dimension of social emotional learning, is forging lasting cross-cultural personal bonds. But the piece here, I think, in the focus, really very important piece here, is also that emphasis on the cultural dimension of it, and that cultural humility, which combines respect with self-awareness, and that cultural humility for us, which is an essential non-negotiable in learning. It's critical, because without that, there is no learning. It is critical to have that cultural humility, because again, that's also how you're seen as authentic, and that's also how you're seen as a trustworthy interlocutor in any kind of conversation or interaction. That cultural humility. So it's not fake, it's not phony, it's real. So intercultural competence, the African roots and the global voices. Again, this also comes frequently in conversations. And at the African continent, for example, let me repeat the fact that when we're talking about the African continent, we're not talking about a monolith. We're not talking about a one continent that is similar on all kinds of things. No, we're talking about a highly diverse continent. I believe we're talking about what, 3,000 languages and more than 3,000 dialects, much more than 3,000 dialects within countries, for example, diversity of tribes, diversities of views of the world, diversity of faiths, diversity of histories. Some of the histories are peaceful, some of the histories are not so peaceful, etc. So we're talking about a very, very rich continent in its complexity. And again, that's not just unique to Africa, but unique to the human race wherever you go. But I just wanted to underscore this, because sometimes when we say Africa, 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 sometimes we create this feeling that we're talking about one monolith or one uniform whole, which is not. So from an African roots of the intercultural standpoint, it's very important to bring up the fact that many countries, many nations, many cultures spoke about the concepts that were highlighted as part of the primary essential requirements of intercultural competencies in multiple different ways. So you've got the famous now Pan-African Ubuntu, but at the same time you got the uh, uh, hello. So I was talking here, like, for me here, what I was doing here, I was just sharing with you this very rich mosaic of different ways of talking about being together. I am because you are. You got, for example, as I said, in Amazigh in Morocco, for example, we have this word of Tawizi, which means working together, collectively being together, achieving a goal together, not leaving anybody behind. And again, just like we talked about the Ubuntu concept, which is I am because you are, the Arabic word Rahma, which is a critical world of being, it's a mix of empathy and a mix of caring about the others, listening to the others, working with each others, etc. So, and what you're seeing here is just a specimen. Again, we're talking about more than 3,000 languages, and every single language has its own take on what it means to build that trust and to work together and to care for each other and to move together to achieve common purpose. Now, so another piece that I'm bringing into this conversation about social emotional learning and intercultural competence is the UNESCO 2050 vision for education. And it insists in this vision, in this new contract for education, on the fact that education must be inclusive and intercultural. Why? Again, because as you're all aware, in the last 25 years, everybody's talking about the world becoming a smaller village and the world becoming flatter, etc. But at the same time, flat is dangerous when some cultures dominate others and others just go extinct. That's a bulldozing type of flatness. That's not what we want, because again, there is so much potential in terms of solutions to our common challenges, and at the same time ways of living that make life on this planet worth living but enjoyable as well. Is to really strive from this intercultural competence to acknowledge, recognize, and enable this intercultural living and intercultural competence. So going back to the Agenda 2063, where it calls for an Africa that grows inclusively, lives in peace, and is proud of its cultural identity. What does that mean in terms of building bridges of intercultural understanding through dialogue? It means, as we recognize the fact that this is a value that we all care about, it means also that it's not as easy as it looks. Like the vision is grand, the vision is inspiring, but also the vision is, it takes creating a movement, takes creating solidarity and coalitions, and most importantly, it takes going after this shared vision of intercultural competence one little step at a time. Why am I bringing this? Because here, and it's a pleasure also to have my colleague Dr. Robin Whitaker with us in this call, and she is one of the founding voices and the director of Africa Voices Dialogue, because again, it reflects all these ideals and values we care about, which is this interculturally competent Africa, where not just the people, the decision makers, the politicians, in their vision of global relevance and global citizenship, part of that vision is also a global citizen where you reach out to your neighbor, where you work with your neighbor, where you not just accept, you collaborate with your neighbor, and because you and your neighbor are in creating this, or in upholding the interests of this continent together. So that's the idea of the Africa Voices Dialogue from an education standpoint, where we're not going to take on all the challenges of energy and maybe infrastructure. while we care about them, but we also see that one of the most intractable ways of taking on these challenges is doing that through education. So Africa Voices Dialogue is a space for Africa's educators, learners, and communities to be seen, heard, and loved. It's a space that recognizes that, yes, maybe in international research centers, maybe international partners or funding, multilateral agencies, etc. All they have a seat at the table, whether we like it or not. But for us to really learn how to stand and walk and figure out how to walk in an authentic way and walk our own walk, be it at the continental level or the country level, we need to create that space where everyone is seen, heard, and loved. And please, I would highly advise you to go to the website to learn more about this vision of creating an integrated Africa through education and through creating the space for voices to be seen, heard, and loved. I'm just going to share with you the definition of
Apologies,
this.
Mohammed. 1 second. I'm so sorry to disturb, but we've got 5 minutes left, so I just wanted to alert you to that.
Thank you so much, Divinia. So just to please, I would do highly advise you to go to the website, but this is how Africa Voices Dialogue, this Pan-African organization that I'm honored to chair the governance team of this organization. This is how it defines all the stakeholders, and it continues to be open to more stakeholders who are willing to be part of the conversation, as long as we have Africa's interests in mind. So the goals is to collaboratively lead and convene dialogues, to support rigorous research and professional learning, and to facilitate the sharing of the lived experiences in the innovative learnings of Africa's educators, learners, and communities with decision-making bodies. So also the Africa Voices Dialogue since 2020 has been leading in facilitating dialogues, workshops, and research collaboratives. These are some examples that you will also be able to see on the website. And again, it's very intentional on the diversity of voices, but at the same time creating coherence around the themes that it promotes. And at the same time, these themes have to be relevant to the future of Africa and to advancing the educational goals that we all care about. So as I come to the end of this speech on this contribution on in strengthening intercultural competence in social emotional learning, let's just think about what's next. So Africa has no continent-wide baseline of or social emotional learning or intercultural competence, and maybe as a community here, I think we have to figure out ways to maybe leverage our research capabilities and our access to policymakers and decision makers to create that baseline. So to know where we are on this highly vital central competencies to the African integration. Without measurement, policymakers and universities are flying blind, and we don't just want them to express grand statements in their documents about the importance of working together, but we want to give them the tools to work together in a methodical fashion. So for me, a Pan-African assessment of intercultural competence can map the strengths and gaps in social emotional learning and intercultural competence. It can guide curricula and teacher training across Africa. It can also inform this free trade agreement, mobility and peace building. It does have that very important piece to it. And that sense of intercultural competence is a critical tool for problem and conflict resolution. And it can elevate African voices globally because it shows how Africa leads in human-centered education. To conclude, in the spirit of Ubuntu and Pan-Africanism, the intercultural competence and strengthening social emotional learning competencies represent the organic human bridges that stand a chance of truly uniting Africa. I'm not saying this is a missing bridge yet, But what I'm saying is we want us to be more mindful about walking that bridge and building it as we think about it. Therefore, educating for humanity for this and the next generation demands that Africa's universities lead the way. Higher education must make intercultural competence in social emotional learning priority frontier of research and practice. And for me, this is the walk of the talk about cultural humility in action. It's a shared journey of learning about ourselves and each other, turning values into lived practice in unity, into strength, because there is so much that we haven't learned about each other yet. And it takes us to at least be aware of the fact that we need to we have this need, and we need to figure out how to start the journey together. I believe that's it for me. It's so I'm open to questions and looking forward to
Thank you.
the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I think this keynote, I mean, it brought up all of the excitement again in me, having listened to you. I think, even in our conversations, in the post-conference, the work that needs to be done. And for me, I think the platform that you've created for the Africa Dialogue is really key for this. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so we don't have time for questions and answers. But I do want to direct you to the ICC in Africa Working Group follow-up meeting so we can continue this discussion, because I see that the chat has been fire and we really want to engage more. This is happening next week, Wednesday, the 12th of November at 3 p.m. South Africa time. We have posted the link into the chat to register for that. And also thank you to Robin for just sharing in the link the Education for Africa Dialogue Summit information. So I'd encourage everyone to go and look at that. So before we close off, I'd like to hand over back to Dala. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davinia. And again, huge thank you to Dr. Mohammed Elmeski for such an insightful and invigorating talk today. Lots of food for thought. And we look forward to continuing the discussion next Wednesday with many of you. Hopefully you can join us then. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. We look forward to having you join us again for our 2026 monthly webinar series starting in February. But this concludes our webinar series for 2025. And we just appreciate all of those who have been speakers at this monthly webinar series in this year. And a special thank you to our co-chairs, Davinia, Jitu, and Precious Simba, for guiding us in the many discussions that we've had. Such amazing discussions and food for thought throughout this monthly webinar series. And we are grateful to each of you for joining us and being part of this. And we look forward to seeing you again next week for continued discussion, and then again in February. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.